Okie dokie. I'm trying to make this one a short one today, but in lieu or in light of some recent unfortunate happenings with a couple different individuals, I figured I would make a critical systems checklist for the installation process of an off-grid solar system. Most of this stuff is pertainable to all off-grid, not just the Leaf batteries, but there's one or two things that are specific to the Leaf batteries. But these are just things to have in mind when you go to first install it. A lot of people get really excited, and it takes them a while to get everything ordered and making sure they got the right things and the right size of this and all the cables and connectors and fuses and everything. And they forget about learning how to put it all together. So when they go to try to put it together, it's a brand new lesson that they're learning right then and there, which creates the opportunity for more mistakes. And so I'm going to go through this checklist that I made that's usable for the installation day, when you finally get all those four components and all the other little minor things put together, and you actually want to start harnessing the power of our closest burning ball of nuclear fission. So this is for that, for when you've got it all ready together and you're ready to start creating your own power. That's a good rule of thumb, and I'm basing this off of my own experience, and nobody else has really told me this, but go backwards. When you're installing a solar system, you never want to start with your panels. You can mount your panels if you want and get that headache out of the way, but don't plug them into anything. Start at the other end of the solar system. Start with your outlet boxes. Start with your switches. Wire those in where you want. Get your Romex wired to, then put in your breaker box wherever you want, because most people are going to have a breaker box. I don't have one. That's why you've never seen one in my system, because I only run one circuit. I've only got 2 outlets. That's 6 plugs, including the 2 on the actual thing. But getting back to the going backwards, after the breaker box, it would go more Romex into your inverter. Depending on what style of inverter, if it's a charger as well, or if it's also a transfer switch, there might be a couple more wires to attach, a grounding wire in there somewhere. But for the most part, the breaker box will be going into the inverter. And keep in mind, I'm doing this all backwards. From the inverter, it would then go to your batteries, or an inline fuse if you want. I don't have one in mine. I don't feel that there's a necessity. It is peace of mind. It is another fail-safe and another redundancy, which is, it's not possible to have too many of those in an electrical system. So if you want to put a fuse between the inverter and the batteries, go for it. I've got a 2-aught cable, and that's the only thing that's making that connection. And then from the batteries are going to go to an inline fuse. I would suggest at least putting one on the positive wire of that connection between the batteries and charge controller. If you want to overdo it, you can use 2 on each. These are the style that I use. They're just a simple car inline fuse. You can get the blade fuse ones that will take this kind of fuse. You've all seen that, right? From a car. They make them all different sizes and colors. You can use those too. Any auto parts store is going to have this style or that style. This is just for the small glass fuses, like it comes apart, and that's the fuse that's actually in it. And you put it back together, and it's got a spring, and it's watertight in there. And so to install this, all you do is, you got to get it put back together. Cut this. It looks kind of funny, and people are like, how do I even use that? It's just a loop. You cut it. It's designed to cut it, and then this goes into the actual wire, and then you tape it, or you crib it, or you use the butt slicers, whatever, to install that. That's why I call it an inline fuse. But you can get the blade fuse ones that are just snapped down in there. They do have some waterproof ones with little rubber covers on it. Auto parts stores are great for things like that because they have all the fixings and fittings and cables and boxes and everything for 12 volt. And that's another thing that I didn't get into before we got to the charge controller. From the batteries, if you're going to run a 12 volt step down box, from whatever voltage your system is, 4824, if you're going to have devices and appliances that are 12 volts, you're going to want to take advantage of that because they are more efficient. And the way you do that with the Nissan Leaf batteries is you include that step down box. I've went over that in videos before, but I didn't ever really tell where to put it or how it connects. I don't have a physical example of it, so I can't really show you. But that box would go straight to the batteries. It's a DC to DC step down, so it's okay to take that straight to the battery terminals. And that battery or that step down will then convert it to 12 volts, and then on the other side of that step down box, those connections, you're going to have 4 wires from that box, 2 to the batteries, 2 to the fuse box or fuse blade box, whatever you want to call it. And then that's your step down. And then from the fuse box, it would be just like any other normal 12 volt setup. You go to your devices, and depending on your devices, you might want to have extra redundancies on those lines, but you're essentially going to have a fuse for each one of them already. But that 12 step or 12 volt step down block doesn't need to be installed in any order. You could do that before, after, whatever. You could have your battery bank not hooked to anything and still be powering things with your 12 volt system if you wanted. And I wish I had a physical example to show you. I just don't. I don't need it. I don't have anything 12 volt right now. It's just not a necessity that I needed. That kind of goes back to my system is extremely bare bones. It's for me and a 13-year-old part-time. And so I didn't run 400 circuits. I've only got this 118 square feet. Everything's kind of combined in this box, and there's outlets on both of these boxes. I've got USB charge cords. It works for me, more than works for me. It's more than enough for me. So there's no reason for me to go overboard, but I don't think that I accentuate that enough in these videos. Like I'm one person in 118 square feet. That's a whole different equation when you start designing the size of solar systems and whatnot. Families out there are 6 and 7 people strong. Obviously they're going to have a different solar system, but it's pretty much the same thing. Stupid peas. It's pretty much the same thing. You're just beefing everything up. More batteries, more panels, more thicker wires, more Jesus. Okay, apparently the wasp, or not the wasp, but the beehive is moving indoors. So that's where this 12 volt, or the step down block would go, coming straight from the batteries. The very last connection is getting your panels connect. Oh wait, we didn't get into the specific. We're going from the batteries to the charge controller. I mentioned the inline fuse. Get that put in there. That is the one fuse that I would say is absolutely needed. You're going to save your batteries and or your charge controller. There's a fail-safe redundancy there that is between the 2 most expensive things of the whole system. So after that, from the charge controller is going to have 3 main sets of terminals, and maybe 1 or 2 other that depending on the brand and size. But the 3 main ones are going to be a positive and negative for your panels, a positive and negative for your batteries, and a positive and negative for your load terminals. Where I'm running a 24 volt system, so the load terminals on my charge controller are 24 volts. They're not 12, so don't go plugging 12 volt lights or fans or anything directly into your charge controller if you are using the Nissan Leaf batteries, because it's going to be 24 volts. Buy 24 volt appliances or step it down from the battery, but don't use that terminal that's specified for loads on your charge controller for 12 volt. You'll fry them. You'll be pumping 24 volts into 12 volt appliance. I fried a couple of LED bulbs that way before I figured out that the load terminals just mirror the actual voltage of the battery, so you can see what it is. It's the same voltage as the main screen of your charge controller, and it will always be that. I replaced some of my my LED color changers with models that had a variable operational voltage, if that makes any sense. If you look on them on the back, it says will operate between 6 and 24 volts. Don't ask me how that works. I'm sure it's some sort of special LED technology, but you can plug that into a power source that's between 6 and 24 volts, and it'll work just fine the same. It doesn't matter. So that was an easy fix on that one. But okay, going back to between the charge controller and panels. The panels are going to be the very, very last thing that you want to connect. There's no reason to connect them anything before you have everything else ready to go and set up, and it's only going to damage your charge controller. If you have your panels plugged into that charge controller before there's a battery to charge, you're essentially just pumping all that electricity from the panels straight into your charge controller box, and your charge controller box just becomes a huge heat sink. And it won't look like it's like blowing up or catching on fire at the very first when you first hook it up. So you might think to yourself, oh, this is fine, nothing's happening, it seems right. But it is heating up all the electronics, all the circuitry, everything in that box. It just doesn't need to be. So very last thing, connect your solar panels. That's the step-by-step installation of the physical hardware. Let's roll it back to the charge controller and discuss a couple of the Nissan Leaf specific checklist things that you're going to want to do. when utilizing the Leaf batteries anyway. And when one thing before I get too into the Nissan Leaf specifics, your multimeter is going to be your best friend with this whole process. I would suggest after every single connection you make, right down to the bus bars on the batteries, make a connection, get your multimeter out, and make sure it's right. You should know what the number is in your head. You're the one putting it all together, and you're the one that ordered it all. So that's what this guy's for. If you put two batteries together in series, look for 16 volts. You know, if you're combining a whole bunch and you want the whole pack to stay 24, make sure you've got 24 volts still available after you combine multiple packs. You know, if you don't have a BMS system at first or never going to get one, you can do it like I do and use this thing once or twice a day to check, you know, the pack battery or the pack voltage and individual modules. Like I basically turn this into a manual BMS just because it's all right there. It's convenient. It takes me 30 seconds to turn it on and see, okay, that I'm still good. Everything's, you know, balanced enough and working the way it should. So don't be afraid of this. There's no stupid questions about these either. Like, they can be a little intimidating, and some of them have 400 million options that you will never use, but they are definitely your best friend with anything solar, really anything electric. Like that tells you the specifics of what's going on, so you won't be able to accidentally, you know, ruin anything or you know, cause problems in some other area. So that is not just Leaf specific, but that's anything. Have that. Do a small step, check it. Small step, check it. You know, you're not gonna, you're drastically reduce your chances of failure or mistakes when you're using that thing step by step or after each step. Which does bring me to another Leaf specific checklist. Critical, maybe even more important than connecting your solar panels last. When utilizing the Neef, I mean, I should just call it Neef, Nissan and Leaf together, the Neef batteries, the charge controller must be set. You absolutely have to set those charge parameters. I've said it a million times in my videos in the past about it being the only one headache to utilize the Leaf modules, and it is. It's a little bit intimidating when you first get it and you look at that list of numbers and all these terminologies that you don't know and don't understand. But it's a 5-minute headache that you only have to do it once, and once the charger controller is set, you can walk away from it forever. So the Leaf batteries, they're 8.3 volts, brand new from the factory. To make a 24 volt system, put 3 of those in series to create a 24.9 volt battery. So three Leaf modules together at 8 volts is 24.9. You cannot let anything go over 25. I have my over voltage disconnect set at 25.2. I have my over voltage alarm set at 25.1, and I have my charge limit set at 25.0, just 25 right on the dot. So those 3 are the overprotection, and those are the most important 3 when it comes to the Leaf modules, because they're not a lead acid battery. They don't fluctuate. In the olden days, when you bought a 12 volt battery, you fully charged it to 14.4 volts, even though it was called a 12 volt battery. Lithium ion does not work that way. It has absolutely no flex, no play, and it's not going to, you know, handle an overcharge like a lead acid battery, a deep cycle, even AGM. So you've got to get those. I mean, you have to set them all, but those are definitely the 3 most important parts. You cannot overcharge these, because what happens when you overcharge them is those pouches inside of the module, the lithium pouches have liquid lithium in it, and when you overcharge them, it has nowhere to go. It's going to keep accepting a charge because it won't shut it off automatically. So it's just going to keep expanding those lithium packs. I've showed you a couple pictures of some unfortunate happenings from a couple other people. Last night, a certain individual had shown me their pictures of a system that they left for less than 4 hours. But they had hooked it all up and everything was running and looked good, but they didn't set those parameters in their charge controller. So that charge controller was pumping, I think they had it set at like 20. Well, you know what, I don't even know what they had it set at. They went to work and came back on their lunch break, and it was already at 28.8, which is 3.5 volts more than 3, almost 4 volts over the very, very maximum limit that you want to be. And that individual lost 3 of their 9 Leaf modules because of just too much damage. It's not worth using something like that if you're not confident in touching it. You know, like that was the most extreme case that I had seen, and I'm not going to name any names. It wasn't anybody's fault. It was a beginner's mistake on their part, and it was my fault for not being thorough enough, not having this kind of the information in this video available. You know, I don't think the problems that they had would have happened if I had done this or been a little bit more thorough. So I'm not blaming it totally on myself, and I'm not blaming it totally on them. It's a brand new industry with a bunch of brand new technology, and especially when we're trying to break all the rules and use the Leaf modules. Mistakes will happen. It costed them $250, but it would have costed them $1,250 had the batteries been brand new. You know, so even with the mistake that catastrophic and they lost 3 full modules, you're still at half the price of brand new. You could replace all the batteries and still be under the price of brand new. So it's unfortunate that they had to learn that lesson, but it's also given me an idea or the motivation to do a video like this, so that people, you know, things that I assume and take for granted aren't common knowledge in an industry that's so new. So I apologize for that, and I'm trying to make up and get more information out with this video. Another thing critical to double check, and you probably shouldn't have bought it in the first place if you didn't do this, but your charge controller, is it big enough? Is it rated for enough amps for the amount of solar panels you have? I've gone through it in other videos, but the way to figure that out and the way to calculate it is look at the specifications on your solar panels. On the back of the physical panel, there'll be a sticker with all that information, but you can find it online and whatnot from the manufacturer. But what you need to find is the short circuit amperage rating, or the open short circuit amperage rating. It's probably going to be a number somewhere between 5 and 11. That's the amount of amps that is possible, the max amount of amps that's possible from each panel. So if you had 4 panels that were 9.5 amps each of their short circuit rating, that means you're going to have, you know, 49 or 48 and a half or 38 and a half volt or amps coming into the charge controller. That to me is too close to use a 40 amp charge controller. That's just pushing it to the limit, and you don't want to do that every day. It doesn't matter if it's solar, like any piece of machinery isn't designed to run at their maximum potential indefinitely. So you know, that's where that goes. Short circuit, just the size of the inverter is extremely important, but it's not specific to the Leaf modules. That's any off-grid solar. You got to have a charge controller that's rated higher than the total of your short circuit amps. It's really that simple, but it can seem way more complicated and whatnot. But you look on that sticker on the back, it's going to have a bunch of numbers, but one will say open short circuit or short circuit, whatever. But make sure those combined with all your, total those up from each panel, and make sure that your charge controller is bigger, is rated bigger than that. You know, you're not going to hurt anything by getting the next step up with the charge controller. All that's going to provide is flexibility for you to expand in the future. All right, I think that's okay. We had a couple of fuses in the actual system that I feel are optional, but other people might not feel that are optional. I kind of went over it between the batteries and inverter. If you feel like you want to have a kill switch or an invert or a fuse in there, it's not going to hurt anything. Between the charge controller and panels, you know, some people are going to be using a charge or a solar combiner box, and some people are going to be using the MC4 connectors, and so that's a place that you could put a fuse if you want after you combined all those panels down to the 2 wires. If you put a fuse, something bigger than this, but so I put a fuse in after they've been combined, but before the charge controller, so in between there, that's where you would put a fuse if you'd want one. And I think I've covered everything that I wanted to, at least. Again, assemble the solar set. Once you got everything, go backwards. Start with your outlets, literally what you're going to be powering. You know, outlets, Romex, breaker box, Romex into inverter, inverter to battery terminals. Somewhere in there you would install separately, not connected to that connection between the inverter and batteries, but somewhere in there you would install your step down box if you want one. From the batteries would go to the charge controller with a inline fuse between the charge controller and MC4 connectors, or your branch box is open. If you want to put a fuse in there, you can if you want. That's not, in my opinion, something that's needed. And then from whatever combiner device, combiner box, MC4 connectors, whatever one you decide to use, then that just goes to your panels. But two critical things that, if I want to recap, never plug your solar panels in first. You've got to have that battery charging when those panels are plugged in. There's got to be somewhere for that electricity to go. And the second most critical one, Nissan Leaf specific, you've got to set those charge parameters before you plug anything in. I mean, you can plug the battery in. Obviously, you have to do that to get it powered up. But once you get that, just stop everything else. You've got to set those parameters. If you don't, something will happen. It's not going to beep at you. It's not going to give you a warning, because according to the parameters, the charge controller thinks it's doing what it is supposed to. However, that's not how it works. So critical to set those charge parameters before you try to charge your Nissan Leaf batteries. Other than that, all the other important checklist items were the same as any other solar system. They're not specific to the Leaf batteries. Use your multimeter. It's going to save you money, save your life possible, and make everything much less of a headache. I think I'll leave it at that, because I can't think of anything else that is super critical. Go backwards, use your multimeter, step by step. That's what I'll say.